Hi everyone, my name is Andrea and I will be talking about the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Okay, Voting Rights Act of 1965 bans racial discrimination in voting practices by the federal government as well as by state and local governments. The Voting Rights Act, signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson on August 6, 1965, aimed to overcome legal barriers at the state and local levels that prevented African Americans from voting. Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965 after a century of deliberate and violent denial of the vote to African Americans in the South and Latinos in the Southwest, as well as many years of entrenched electoral systems that shut out citizens with limited fluency in English. The Voting Rights Act is often held up as the most effective civil rights law ever enacted. It is widely regarded as enabling the enfranchisement of millions of minority voters and diversifying the electorate in legislative bodies at all levels of American government. The act banned the use of literacy tests provided for federal oversight of voter registration in areas where less than 50% of the non-white population had not registered to vote, and authorized the U.S. Attorney General to investigate the use of poll tax in state and local elections. The Voting Rights Act also provides the Department of Justice with the authority to appoint federal observers and examiners to monitor elections to ensure that they are conducted fairly. In 1975, the Voting Rights Act was amended to address the voting rights of language minority groups. Section 4 and 203 of the VRA apply in jurisdictions with significant numbers of voters with limited or no English proficiency and require such jurisdictions to provide voting materials and assistance in relevant languages in addition to English. Okay, so Southern Blacks also risk harassment, intimidation, economic reprisals, and physical violence when they tried to register to vote. As a result, African Americans had little political power, either locally or nationally. In Mississippi, for instance, only 5% of eligible blacks were rejected. Only 5% of eligible blacks were registered to vote in 1960. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 grew out by both public protest and private political negotiation. Starting in 1961, CORE joined SCLC in staging nonviolent demonstrations in Georgia and Birmingham. They hoped to attract national media attention and pressure the U.S. government to protect blacks' constitutional rights. Newspaper photos and TV broadcasts of Birmingham's racist police commissioner Eugene Bull Connor and his men violently attacking the protesters with water hoses, police dogs, and nightsticks awakened the concerns of whites. In March 1965, on a bridge outside Selma, Alabama, a second phase of the revolution was born. Civil and human rights activists led by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others took the streets in a peaceful protest for voting rights for African Americans. They were met with clubs and violence. Many were beaten and severely injured. Television brought this conflict of angry violence against peaceful moral protests into living rooms across America. 5 days later, President Lyndon B. Johnson announced to a joint session of Congress that he would bring them an effective voting rights bill. Echoing the spiritual anthem of the civil and human rights movement, he said simply, "We shall overcome." He and we did overcome. On August 6, 1965, Johnson signed into law the Voting Rights Act.